I actually served a total of 43 years as a policeman. I had first 11 years with the Metropolitan Police, which is in London, England. And I did some uniform work there, and I was a detective when I resigned in order to emigrate to Canada. And when I emigrated, I joined the Toronto Police Service and spent just over 32 years with them. And I retired with the rank of inspector. During my early years with the Toronto Police Service, I was in 51 Division, which is in the east end of Toronto. Foot patrol, driving a scout car, which most officers do. And then I became the first divisional crime analyst there. I was then promoted and sent out to Scarborough, 43 Division, where I was a patrol sergeant for a couple of years. Then I went to our own police college in Toronto, where I was an instructor in the management professional development section there. And then I was promoted out of there to Staff Sergeant, back to uniform, in charge of a platoon in 13 Division. Very, very good platoon. Great bunch of guys and girls, and very good road sergeants. Not much left for me to do. I wasn't there very long. I was only there for 4 months, and then I was transferred to our criminal intelligence unit, where I was in charge of the records and analytical section there. After a few years there, I went to the Criminal Intelligence Service Ontario. That's I was seconded there, and that's officers from several major police services working together, dealing with organized crime. And there I was in charge of the strategic analytical section and other duties. From there, I went to the Ontario Police College as an acting inspector in the leadership section there, teaching new supervisors, middle management, and upper management. So while I was at the Ontario Police College, I was an acting inspector. From there, I was then seconded to what was called the Campbell Project. You may remember Justice Archie Campbell did an inquiry into the investigations of Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka as to how the police investigated, how they shared information, or as it turns out, didn't. And he made a few dozen recommendations, 68 recommendations. And our task on the Campbell Project was to implement those recommendations. So that included reorganizing how information was gathered, how it was stored. We developed a computer database, training, and so on. But in order to make sure all of this was working, we also helped on several predatory and serial homicide investigations around the province. We had to have some practical experience as to how all of this was going to work, and it's still working to this day. And after 4 years there, I was then promoted to inspector. Short time at the duty desk, short time in the employment unit, and then to our professional standards branch. Used to be called internal affairs, but now we refer to it as professional standards. Okay. And I was designated as the chief's complaint officer. So every time there was a complaint from a member of the public, it would come to me, come across my desk, and I would then make an investigation myself and then decide where it should be dealt with, whether it was an internal discipline matter or if it should be dealt with by another unit, or if criminal charges should be laid in. So that was quite an interesting couple of years there.
Well, if you were in, if you had that job right now, you'd need rooms full of complaint letters. You'd have stacks, thousands, but yes. We know you probably wouldn't have let this happen.
Well, I would have been a voice in the wilderness, quite frankly, but I would certainly have been a voice. I had been to some of the chiefs that we had there, rarely listened to me, but I was quite prepared to tell it as it really should be done. No qualms about that whatsoever.
Well, when did you realize that something's not right going on in Canada?
Well, if we go back a year when this so-called pandemic first reached our shores, of course, we had absolutely no idea what the future was going to hold. We did not know what we didn't know. So for our governments to ask us, which they did at the time, to take certain precautions, wear a mask if you're in public or in a store, try social distancing, don't gather in large groups, etc. They asked us to do that, and it seemed reasonable because we didn't know anything about this particular virus, didn't know enough about it. But as time passed and we started gathering hard data about what was happening, even Canadian government data was telling us quite clearly, sadly, who was at risk. It was the elderly, particularly those with comorbidity issues, and more often than not in long-term care homes. And so it was absolutely unbelievable that they decided there's going to be a second wave. We're going to be testing a lot more people, and there's going to be, I remember the headlines here I live in Ottawa. I remember the headlines in the Ottawa Sun, another deadly day of virus outbreaks. There wasn't any deaths. They tested a bunch of people, and we all know the efficacy of the PCR test is useless. But they decided there's going to be this dreadful wave. Therefore, we have to have yet stricter, more draconian regulations in order to force people not to gather, to force people not to go and see their parents and their grandchildren, force people to stay apart from each other and so on. It was outrageous. And as I'm looking through the regulation when it was very, very first published, it was, to me, absolutely plain and obvious that most of what they were regulating and providing penalties for were things that are guaranteed in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms is so important, it's placed inside our Constitution. There is nothing more important than our rights and freedoms. And here they are implementing these regulations that are blatantly against those inalienable human rights. And I can't believe that they would task the police to do that. That didn't make any sense to me. We had not done this before. We went through the Spanish flu just after the First World War. We had Hong Kong flu in the late 60s. More recently, we've had SARS, H1N1. We've had bird flu. We've had swine flu. Police should not be involved in this, not at all. We should be there to help people and to help the health authorities, for sure, but not to turn ordinary, everyday, good people into criminals and start treating them like criminals. It flies in the face of all reason, and it certainly, I think, very, very serious breaches of our constitutional rights. Mm-hmm. And so when I started to realize what was going on, and like everybody else, watching the news, reading the newspapers, I said to myself, why on earth would somebody get upset because kids are skating on an ice rink? Why would people get upset because people are following their religious beliefs? And why would they be dealt with so harshly? Here are people, good, everyday, honest, everyday people, daring to suggest that the regulations that their governments have imposed on them might be wrong, that there should be other views. Ask somebody else. Let's see what the real truth is here. And here we are, sending in the stormtroopers to break up these protests, which is absolutely outrageous. It should never, ever have happened. So I was, as you can imagine, quite frustrated. There's nothing I could do about it. I'm retired. I do not have a voice in Toronto, and they wouldn't listen to me anyway. And now I live in Ottawa. So what could I possibly do? I felt I had to do something. And it was actually my wife that came across a Facebook page entitled "Please Stand on Guard for Thee." She said, you better look at this and see if there's something you can do. And basically what had happened was a group of active police officers initially from the GTA area recognized the same thing, that these regulations are wrong. You can ask people to do these things, but you can't force them to do them if they're in breach of the charter, because it says right in the charter, all laws, municipal, provincial, bylaws, federal laws, all laws, criminal laws, must be held to the standard of the Charter on Rights and Freedoms. Must be. And these never were. I don't think that anybody could have possibly thought to themselves, we'll just ignore the charter. That's a deliberate movement to do that. But this group of active police officers saw the same thing, and they recognized very, very quickly that it was wrong. So therefore, they decided, quite lawfully and quite rightly, that they should seek some advice from a lawyer. So they engaged the services of one of the most brilliant constitutional lawyers that I know, Rocco Galati. Mm-hmm. And he is advising them as to a civil remedy that can be sought, insofar as he will be seeking an injunction to get clarification from the court as to the incongruities between the regulations and the charter. What's very, very difficult for police officers is to become a police officer. You go through selection, you go through training, etc., but then you have to swear an oath of office, much like doctors have a Hippocratic oath, lawyers have an oath, and police have an oath. And I just read this to you just for a moment, because the officer's oath is to serve and protect citizens, to guarantee everyone's rights and freedoms, and to discharge their duties faithfully, impartially, and according to the law. That's their oath. The first thing in there is people's rights and freedoms. These officers are now being ordered to breach their oath. Now, I suppose you could ask somebody to do that once, and they may or may not do it. But when they're being forced to do it day after day after day, it is going to take a toll. It is taking a toll. I know it is. Especially with people of high moral standards. Now, being asked to deal with people that are already suffering dreadfully as a result of this stupid lockdown system. People losing their jobs, people not being able to see their family, their parents, their grandparents, their grandchildren, the dreadful increase in suicides, particularly amongst young people, increase in domestic violence, increase in substance abuse. Here in Ottowa, Chio published an article that they're seeing an inordinate increase in babies with head injuries, which is dreadful. I mean, that's just scary. It's really awful. And these are all the result of these draconian measures. They take a toll on the police officers, because they're not just enforcing these outrageous regulations, but they're also having to deal with the fallout from all of these lockdown systems.